بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ومن والاه. كتاب الأضحية, and it's plural أضاحي. So in some of the books you're going to see the word أضحية. In some you might see أضحى or أضحى or أضاحي. All of these words refer to the same thing, and that is to sacrifice, and not just any sacrifice. You could sacrifice it today, but it won't be called أضحية. And similarly, you can sacrifice as many hens as you would want, and that also won't be an uzhiyah. So uzhiyah refers to a sacrifice that is done in specific days of a specific kind of animal, right? So we'll discuss each aspect of what kind of animal do we mean when we talk about uzhiyah, and we'll also talk about the time frame in which this has to be done. الأضحية واجبة على كل حر مسلم مقيم موسر في يوم الأضحى. So Udhya is necessary, it's an obligation on every free Muslim man or woman. They should be residing either permanently in one place or have made the intention of residing in an area for 15 days or more, temporary residence. And they should be financially well off. That means Uzhiya is not an obligation on number one, a person who is not free. A slave has no obligation of the Uzhiya. A non-Muslim has no obligation of the Uzhiya because it is an act of ibadah and they are not obliged to any ibadah. A person traveling, even though they may be financially well off, and there is no obligation of Uzhiya on them. And we don't decide these conditions. These conditions uh, are narrated to us by the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So both Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu and Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, both of them did not use to sacrifice an animal. They didn't perform udhiyah when they were traveling, right? And you need to be financially well off. So if a person is not financially well off, and then there's no obligation on them. And haddul yasar, how do we define a person who's financially well off? In Kitab al-Zakat, we study two types of nisab. There's this nisab in which zakat becomes wajib. You have to pay zakat. But there's another type of nisab. If you reach that, you don't have to pay zakat, but you can't accept a zakat as well. So in udhiyah, when we talk about yasar, being financially well off, we refer to this second type of nisab, which is the same as the nisab of zakat, except for the type of wealth that is involved. Uh, if you have that nisab of silver or of gold, of anything which exceeds your needs and use. So, for example, if you have two cars, one sitting in the garage, you've not been using it for like ever, a year or more, right? There won't be any zakat on it because you're not intending to sell it, but it will form part of your second nisab, which might prevent you from actually taking zakat or having to make an udhiyah for the simple reason that it is in excess. You're not using it at the moment, right? So any type of wealth which you have, which you're not using, right? Regardless of it's for sale or not, if it reaches the nisab, then you are considered financially well off. And if you have that nisab, when the time comes, the 10th of Dhul-Hijjah, you're going to have to make the uzhiyah for it. And there's no condition of an year passing, like you have in zakat. Even if you get it the day before, you would have to perform the uzhiyah the next day. في يوم الأضحى, and this has to happen in the day of Adha, the 10th, 11th, and the 12th of Dhul Hijjah. Now, off the bat, some people ask question, is uzhiyah wajib on each single person, or is it wajib on an entire household? Right? Well, there's a difference in opinion between us and Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. We say that udhiya is wajib on every single person who meets the conditions that we just discussed. On the other hand, Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala says that udhiya can be done. A single udhiya can suffice an entire family, whether it's family of 3, 5, 7, 10, doesn't really matter. Both of us base our opinions on some ahadith, right? So for example, Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, he has an hadith in which the Prophet Islam mentioned ala kulli ahli baytin udhiya wa atira, that on every single household there is an udhiya, right? On the other hand, we have another hadith in which the Prophet Islam mentioned ala kulli ahad, on every single person there is an udhiya, conditions included. Right? So we have two hadiths. One suggests that every single person himself is obligated to do so. And we have an hadith which suggests that every family has to do so, not every single person. Uh, but remember that they used to live in a time where the sole breadwinners of the family were men, right? And so there was one single person who was Ahlul Yasar in the household, usually the husband slash father, right? He held the entire wealth of the house, so usually he would be Sahib al-Nisab. And so that's why Ahlul Bayt over there would refer to ay qayyimu Ahlul Bayt, the one running the house, because he would be the one with the financial standing. But nowadays, especially in Western countries, when men and women both are earning, right? And so if each of them reach Nisab, then each would be obligated to do so. And this in turns comes to the other hadith that we just mentioned, of the one that the Ahnaf use in their reasoning. And we can reconcile with the hadith of Imam Malik with the way that we just mentioned. Second thing that some people ask is he a wajib or is it a sunnah? Because some Aimma, for example, Imam Shafi rahmahullah ta'ala, suggests that it is a sunnah, right? Sunnah mu'akkada. But according to the Muftabihi opinion within the Hanafi madhab, it is wajib on anyone who can afford to do so. And since it's an act of ibadah, the safe side of it is to count it as a wajib. Right? يذبح عن نفسه وعن ولده الصغير ويذبح عن كل واحد منهم شاة أو يذبح بدنة أو بدنة أو بقرة عن سبعة. So one should slaughter an animal on his behalf and on behalf of his minor child. This opinion that Imam Quduri mentions is not the Muftabihi opinion. We don't give fatwa on this. The fatwa is that he doesn't have to slaughter an animal on behalf of his minor children. So there's a difference between Sadaqatul Fitr and Udhiyah. In Sadaqatul Fitr, the father would have to pay on behalf of his child as well. But Udhiyah will only be done on his behalf. He doesn't have to do it on behalf of his minor child. Right? So that's the Rajih opinion. And what can you sacrifice? For each person, you might sacrifice either one sheep or one goat, or you could sacrifice a camel or a cow or a buffalo. And a camel and a cow can be up to 7 pieces, and 7 people. Could be less than 7, could be 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, could even be one single person, but no more than 7. Because since the ibadah over here is sacrificing an animal, so what logic dictates to us is that one animal of whatever kind should be for one single person. But again, the deen is not based on sole logic. You have the hadith and the Quran to guide you, which tells us that up to 7 is allowed. What about 8 or 9? Well, again, since the qiyas is, and the logic over here is, one sacrifice should be for one person, will only allow the excess of what is allowed to us by the hadith or by the Quran, which is 7. When you start to increase from 7, we go back to the original ruling of no more than that, right? وَلَيْسَ عَلَى الْفَقِيرِ وَالْمُسَافِرِ أُزْهِيَةٌ. It's not necessary on the needy or the traveler to make a sacrifice. And we already just talked about that, right? So just to clarify about the difference of opinion, household and family, uh, they probably mean the same thing, but it's not on one household. Like one family does not have to make one uzhiyah, but every single person in the family who meets the condition must make an udhiyah on their own. They can share a cow or a camel if they want, but it should be done for each single person and not the entire family. Now, when is the time for udhiyah? وقت الأضحية يدخل بطلوع الفجر من يوم النحر. The time for sacrifice begins from the dawn of the 10th day of Zulhijjah, يوم النحر. Although that's the time when Udhiyah starts, but for those people living in cities or large villages where Juma is wajib, one cannot commence with the sacrifice حتى يصلي الإمام صلاة العيد. It's not permissible for those living in cities or large villages to begin slaughtering their animals until the Eid prayers have been offered. فأما أهل السواد, and with regards to those inhabiting villages, فيذبحون بعد طلوع الفجر, they can start just as Fajr starts, even if they perform Eid in their village. So it's not about if you perform Eid or not, it's about whether the Eid prayers are wajib. So because in small villages, Eid prayers are not wajib, even if the Ahlus Sawad, the villagers, are doing it, that doesn't change the fact that you can still sacrifice your animal just as Fajr starts. But if you're living in cities, you can't do that until the Eid prayer has been performed. Right. Sometimes you want to quickly be done with your sacrifice. And so a hila for that is to send your sacrifice, a sacrificial animal, outside the boundaries of the city and have it sacrificed over there. So once it's outside the city boundaries, you can have it sacrificed as Fajr starts. And usually this is taken into account when you give animals to sacrifice in other country, right? So two things you have to make sure when you're doing that. One, that it's Eid over there and it's Eid at your place as well. So if they're a day ahead on Eid and you give the money for sacrificing an animal over there and they do it on their first day, it won't count as your sacrifice because Eid for you never started. So you have to make sure that it's Eid in both places. After you've made sure of that, you don't have to wait for completing your prayers, your Eid prayers, in order to commence with cutting your nails or hairs if you want to, and other things. You can skip all that process by sending it outside of your city. وهي جائزة في 3 أيام, and this slaughtering is permitted for 3 days. يوم النحر, the day of sacrifice, 10th Zil Hijjah, ويومان بعده, and 2 days afterwards, the 11th and 12th of Zil Hijjah. Asr, after, like the Asr is the last time. As soon as Maghrib enters, your time finishes. Now we know the general category of animals that can be slaughtered. So they're either goats or sheep, or you have camels, or you have bovine animals, cows or buffaloes. But within these categories, there are some conditions that need to be met. And number one, that animal should not be, it should not have some sort of aib, some sort of physical disformity or shortcoming, because a serious disformity can make an animal or can render an animal invalid for the sake of sacrifice. So some of the animals are mentioned within the hadith. For example, the Prophet Islam mentioned, وَلَا تُضَحُّ بِالْعَمْيَاءِ وَالْعُولَى وَالْعَرْجَاءِ الَّتِي لَا تَمْشِي. So Imam Quduri mentions the same animals in the same sequence. وَلَا يُضَحَّ بِالْعَمْيَاءِ. One may not sacrifice a blind animal. وَالْعُورَى, a one-eyed animal. وَالْعَرْجَاء الَّتِي لَا تَمْشِي إِلَى الْمَنْسِكِ or mansak, or a lame animal which cannot walk to the place of sacrifice. It has to drag its leg over there. If it's limping, it's okay. That's not that big of a deal. وَلَا الْعَجْفَ, nor an animal that is extremely weak, right? Similarly, وَلَا تُجْزِئُ مَقْطُوعَةُ الْأُذُنِ وَالذَّنَبِ, an animal which has a severed ear or tail, like completely, that's also not sufficient for sacrifice. وَلَا الَّتِي ذَهَبَ أَكْثَرُ أُذُنِهَا أَوْ ذَنَبِهَا, or an animal whose major portion of the ear or tail is missing. وَإِنْ بَقِيَ الْأَكْثَرُ, but if 50% or more remains intact, only part of it is cut off, then such an animal is permissible, right? The same goes for eyes. For example, if more than 50% of that animal's eyesight is not working, then it cannot be sacrificed. ويجوز أن يضحى بالجماء والخسي والجرباء والثولة. It is permitted to sacrifice a hornless animal, one which was born without horns, and also an animal which has his horns broken. Similarly, a gelded animal, that's also permitted for you to sacrifice, and scabbed animal, and also a mad animal, right? So if it's basic senses and functions, those organs which are related to its basic functions of survival are intact, working perfectly fine, then other types of shortcomings are usually looked over. But if it's eyes, ears, and tail, for example, or its hands or feet, whatever you call them, are damaged, then sacrifice of such animals will not be allowed. That was the first condition of these animals, that they should be in a physically fit form. The other thing is that they should be of a specific age. وَالْأُضْحِيَةُ مِنَ الْإِبِلِ وَالْبَقَرِ وَالْغَنَمِ, sacrifice of camels, bovines, or sheep and goats. يُجْزِئُ مِنْ ذَلِكَ كُلِّ الثَّنِيُّ فَصَاعِدٍ, each of them have to be a thani or more than that. And what is a thani? A thani is an age group which differs for each animal. For camels, it's 5 years. So a camel who is less than 5 years old cannot be sacrificed in udhiyah. Although you can slaughter it and eat it normally, but as far as udhiyah is concerned, it should be 5 years or more. For bovine animals, like cows and buffaloes, it should be at least 2 years old, no less than that. And for sheep and goats, it should be 1 year. Although in sheep, you have the concession of it being just 6 months old as well. إلا الظأن فإن الجزع منه يجزي. Except for the sheep, for a jaz'a is also sufficient. And a jaz'a is a 6-year-old sheep, which is large enough that if you left it in a herd of 1-year-old, you would not be able to, at the first sight, differentiate between it being a child or it being a grown-up. So a healthy, large 6-month-old which cannot be at first sight differentiated between the 1 year from the 1 year olds. Such a large 6-month-old sheep is also permitted. And all of these age groups for each category have been defined by the hadith of the Prophet. Now, what are you supposed to do with Udhya animal once you're done with? So a scabbed animal is a animal which has an itching problem to it, scratching. So sometimes the skin is diseased, which causes the animal to actually uh, scratch itself. They usually do it by scratching off against a pole or the wall or something like that. So a jarba, the one which is scabbed, is allowed with the condition that this problem does not penetrate to its meat. If the condition is so severe that it's penetrated the inside of the skin and it's touched the meat, then such an animal would also be impermissible. But if this itching problem is only on the surface level, then such an animal is permitted to be sacrificed in udhiyah. Now, what are you supposed to do after you're done sacrificing? Every option there is. وَيَأْكُلُ مِنْ لَحْمِ الْأُزْهِيَةِ وَيُطْعِمُ الْأَغْنِيَاءَ وَالْفُقَرَاءَ وَيَدَّخِرُ. You may eat from the meat of the sacrifice, feed it to someone else. Either they are rich or they're needy. You can also store it if you want. You can divide it amongst all three for yourself, for relatives and family and friends, and for the poor. Or you can give it to one single category. You can consume all of it yourself. You can give it all of it to relatives and family and friends, and you can give it all of it to the poor, right? It's mustahab that you divide it in these three parts, and the sadaqah should not be less than 1/3. But again, it is optional, up to you how you want to utilize it. And you can also store it if you want. Uh, ويستحب ألا ينقص الصدقة من الثلث. It is recommended that the sadaqah should not be less than 1/3. ويتصدق بجلدها أو يعمل منه آلة تستعمل في البيت. This was about the meat, about the hide of the animal. So you can either give it in sadaqah or you can use it yourself. You can make a prayer mat out of it, or a handbag out of it as well, if you want. You could make a coat out of it or socks out of it, whatever you want. You can pretty much use it, anything, as long as it's in hide form. But the moment you sell it, if you sell the skin, all the money that is earned from it must go into sadaqah. You can't sell it and then use the money. If you want to use this hide itself, that is permissible. That is permitted, but you cannot sell it off and use the money. If someone does sell it, then they have to give it in sadaqah. والأفضل أن يذبح أضحيته بيده إن كان يحسن الذبح. It's best for men, if they know how to sacrifice an animal, that they slaughter it themselves, if they know how to do it and do it well. For women, it is best that they see their animals being sacrificed. So the Prophet ﷺ, he told Fatima radiallahu anha to go see her animal being sacrificed. So they don't have to get their hands dirty, but they should at least see the thing that they are sacrificing for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the first tier is that a person should sacrifice it themselves if they're able to. If not, then they can take the aid of a Muslim and any other Muslim who has experience in this regards. وَيُكْرَهُ يَذْبَحَ الْكِتَابِيُّ. It is makruh that if Ahlul Kitab slaughtered for you, it won't be haram, like the meat will still be feasible for consumption, but it is makruh to allow an Ahlul Kitab to make the uzhiyah for you, because this is an act of ibadah and you should not be involving these people in it. But let's say you're in a situation in which you have no other options, then again, still okay. Uh, your uzhiya will be complete. You will have to do an other, but it's best to avoid them, right? وإذا غلط الرجلان فذبح كل واحد منهما أضحية الآخر أجزى عنهما ولا زمان عليهما. If two people err and each of them slaughter the sacrificial animal of the other person without their permission, and normally because since the permission wasn't there, this would have been in transgression and that animal would not have qualified as an uzhiyah. Although because a Muslim has slaughtered it, it would still be halal, but it wouldn't count as an uzhiyah, right? So that's logical reasoning. But because since that animal for both parties was for the sake of uzhiyah, we let that slide and say that uh, were considered as being sacrifice, as the ijaza or the idhin, the permission being present, uh, let's say socially. So although there wasn't any verbal or written permission present, but it's a socially acceptable phenomenon that if someone did it, it'll be the same as you asking them for help and them aiding you in it. And so although no permission did exist, but the sacrifice for each party is acceptable, and there's no liability on either of them. Now let's talk about dhabiha. So obviously dhabiha is the process through which uzhiya happens. So we know dhabihatul Muslim wal kitabi halal, that the dhabiha of an animal slaughtered by a Muslim or a person of the people of the book, Ahlul Kitab, it is lawful. You can eat that. But we mentioned just previously that although you should not involve Ahlul Kitab in uzhiya, for other types of slaughtering other than uzhiya, it's perfectly fine. But for uzhiya, it's makruh to involve them, although it's still halal. ولا تؤكل ذبيحة المرتد والمجوسي والوثني والمحرم. But an animal slaughtered by an apostate, a Magian is a person who worships fire, an idol worshipper, or a person in the state of ihram, that is haram. You cannot eat that. And the person in the state of ihram is a Muslim, but because it is forbidden for a person in that state to actually make zabiha, if he does so, it will be haram because he transgressed the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing necessary for zabiya to take place is the tasmiyah. The one sacrificing must say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Having the animal face the Qibla, that is masnoon, that is sunnah, that is not necessary. Even if you don't, your sacrifice is still acceptable. Saying Allahu Akbar is also masnoon, it's not wajib. But saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, that is wajib. وإن ترك الذابح التسمية عمدا فالذبيحة ميتة لا تؤكل. If the one slaughtering the animal deliberately omits saying Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, then the slaughter animal is considered dead, something that died in its own, and it cannot be eaten, which is not halal to eat it anymore. On the other hand, if someone forgets the tasmiyah, saying Allah's name before slaughtering, in that case it is permitted because رفع عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكرهوا عليه, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not hold accountable what happens in nisyan, in forgetfulness. So forgetting it does not render it haram, it's still halal. But omitting it on purpose, that is going to make it the animal haram, whether for uzya or any other situation. Now, usually for goats, sheep, and cows, we use the process of a dhibh, slaughtering. And usually for camels, we use the process of nahr. And nahr is basically a swift jab or kind of a stab, right? So let's discuss both of them. So a zabh, slaughtering or cutting, it happens بين الحلقة واللبة. It's going to happen between the throat and the upper bone of the chest. So that is the area that must be cut. And what you need to cut when doing this, العروق التي تقطع في الزكاة أربعة. There are four types of vessels that need to be cut off. الحلقوم, the trachea, the windpipe. المرئي, the gullet. And al-wadajan, the two jugular veins. If you cut all four of them, حل الأقل, it is lawful for you to eat the animal, according to everybody. وإن قطع أكثرها, if you cut majority of them, a 3 out of 4, any 3. And then according to Abu Hanifa, it is still acceptable, a حل الأقل, lawful. According to the Sahibain though, you must cut the windpipe and the gullet and one of the jugular veins. Right? You don't need to cut both of the jugular veins, only one would do, but the other two vessels must also be cut in order for the animal to be halal. If, for example, you cut both the jugular veins and the oesophagus, but you don't cut the trachea, according to the Sahibain, this animal is not going to be considered halal. But the fatwa is on Imam Abu Hanifa's opinion, which means basically you have to cut 3 out of 4, right? ويجوز الذبح بالليطة والمروة وبكل شيء أنهر الدم إلا السن القائم والظفر القائم. You can slaughter with any sharp object which makes the blood flow, whether it be splinters, sharp stones, anything, except for your nails or teeth when they're fixed to your body. Like if you remove your teeth and if it's sharp enough that you can slaughter an animal with it, that's also acceptable. But as long as it's attached to your jaws, your mouth, and as long as your nails are attached to your hands, you can't use them to slaughter the animal, because then there's this confusion whether or not you kill them by cutting it or you kill it by choking it. So if there's any sort of doubt or confusion that's created, it'll make the animal haram. You don't want to do that. So any sharp object removed from your body, if you use that to make the dhibh, it is acceptable. وَيُسْتَحَبْ أَنْ يُحِدَّ الضَّأْبِ الشُّفْرَةَ. It is recommended for the slaughterer to sharpen his blade before laying down the animal. So, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَتَبَ الْإِحْسَانَ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written ihsan to do everything perfectly, right? فَإِذَا ذَبَحْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الذِّبْحَةَ. So when you're sacrificing or slaughtering, perfect your slaughtering technique. And amongst that is to sharpen the knife before you lay the animal down to slaughter it. So you don't want to keep it in a form which is painful for more than necessary. Also, you shouldn't sharpen it in front of the animal's eyes. You don't want to kill it multiple times, a death before actual death. You don't want to do that either. Similarly, if there are multiple animals that need to be sacrificed, the one that is being sacrificed later should not be shown its predecessor in the ceremony. So hide that animal from seeing that. So all of these things form part of the ihsan, things that you need to make sure, or it's best that you do, right? وَمَنْ بَلَغَ بِالسِّكِّينِ النُّخَاعِ. Whoever reaches the spinal cord with this knife, أو قطع الرأس, or severs the head, كُرِهَ لَهُ ذَلِكَ. This action of cutting so far as to reach the spinal cord or actually chopping the entire head off, that action itself is makruh. But if the 4 vessels that we discussed, they've been cut off, تُؤْكَلْ ذَبِيحَتُهُ, the slaughtered animal is still halal, it can be eaten. وَإِذَا ذَبَحَ الشَّاةَ مِنْ قَفَاهَا. If someone actually slaughters the animal from its neck, not from its throat, you start from the nape. إِنْ بَقِيَتْ حَيَّةً حَتَّى قُطِعَ الْعُرُوقِ جَازَ وَيُكْرَهُ. If it's alive until all the vessels are cut, then it is permitted. But if it actually dies with its neck being broken, it will be a maita and will not be halal. This is how the zibh takes place. Then you have a process you use in camels known as an-nahr. What happens is, if you've seen a camel, its neck is long, right? And all of these four vessels that we're talking about, all of them come together and form kind of a bundle at the base of its neck. So in Nahr, what you do is you do one swift jab in that area where all these vessels come together. And with that one swift jab, you can cut off all four of them. So that's what Nahr is done. You can interchange. You can do Nahr in cows and sheep, and you can do zibh in camel as well. Although it is makruh to do so, the preferred method is to do Nahr in camels and zibh in every other thing, because Nahr is more effective in camels than slaughtering, because it one swift jab is more painless than you actually um, moving your knife in its neck back and forth. On the other hand, because cows have a lot of fat around their neck, you've probably seen it hanging down. A one swift jab is never sufficient. It's going to be painful jabbing it again and again. So it is better to actually cut them while you're performing the zibh. So that's something to remember about when you talk about a zibh. Now, this was the process of udhiyah, but there are things that need to be done on the day of Adha before the process of udhiyah. And what are those things? We'll talk about that now. ويستحب في يوم الأضحى أن يغتسل ويتطيب ويؤخر الأكل حتى يفرغ من الصلاة ويتوجه للمصلى وهو يكبر ويصلي الأضحى ركعتين كصلاة الفطر ويخطب بعدها خطبتين يعلم الناس في الحزية وتكبيرات التشريق. On the day of Adha, it is recommended that one perform ghusl, wear perfume, wear the best clothes that they have, not necessarily new, whatever is the best in your wardrobe. On Fitr, what you would normally do, so on Fitr, what you normally would do was you would eat something sweet before you head out towards the Musalla. On Uzya, you're actually going to do the opposite. You delay eating anything until you're done with your Salah and with your Uzya. It is mustahab to actually, the first thing that you eat on YawmulUdha is to eat from your own Uzhiyah. But again, this is just mustahab. So if you're planning to sacrifice on the second day or plan to sacrifice in the evening, you don't have to starve yourself the entire day. There is no ajr in that, right? Only if you plan on doing it right after your salah and quickly, and usually there's not a lot of people, you can get some meat out and do it, then you should delay eating something, right? Being stubborn about it and not eating, delaying until it's night or even the next day, that's just reckless behavior. Especially, for example, if you have some sort of uh, engaged family engagement you have to go to, right? You'll probably be asked to eat something, so you should. And this is no hujjah or reason to say no, that since my uzhi is not done yet, I'm going to avoid eating until I eat from it. So don't treat a mustahab as a wajib. So this is a baseline rule in everything, right? For yourself, for your dawah activities, for everything else. Every hukum should be treated in the category that it's been assigned. A wajib should be treated as a wajib, not a mustahab. Don't take it lightly. A mustahab should be treated as a mustahab and not a wajib. So don't make it obligatory on yourself, making your life and the life for those around you difficult because of this. So on that note, the next thing that you do, so you go head out towards prayer, and on the way you say the takbiratul Eidain out loud, enough that you can hear yourself. In Eid al-Fitr, you don't usually say it out loud, but in Eid al-Adha, should be loud enough for you to be able to hear yourself. Right? For women, it's not a wajib. Eid prayers, but if you're living in a place where it's usually done, it's not a problem if you go perform it. But if you're living in somewhere where they usually don't attend Eid al-Adha, you shouldn't be championing or making taking out rallies and movements for the sake of this cause. You're not obliged to do it. You don't have to. So one should perform Eid al-Adha prayers the same method as you do in Eid al-Fitr with those 6 extra takbirat. After the prayer is done, the Imam is going to give 2 khutbah in which he can teach about the ahkam of Udhya and he can talk about the takbirat al-tashriq, which actually begin a day before on the 9th of Zulhijjah. If there is some excuse that stops people from actually being able to pray on the first day of Eid, for example, heavy rainfall, then they can pray it on the following day, on the 11th of Zulhijjah, right? Or maybe on the 12th of Zulhijjah, if also possible. But if even on, let's say, 10, 11, 12, heavy rainfall, blizzard, you can't do it, you're not going to pray it after that. So there's no Eid al-Adha on the 13th. So Eid al-Adha can only be performed on the day of the sacrifice, 10, 11, and 12. And 11 and 12 only in the case when you have a valid udhr of reason of not being able to pray on the 10th. If there was no excuse and someone does not pray, then they cannot make qaza of it on the 11th or 12th. You only get that chance if there was a valid reason for being unable to pray it on the 10th. We're talking about takbirat tashriq. So what is that? So takbirat tashriq, it starts from the fajr of the 9th Zulhijjah and ends with the asr of the 10th Zulhijjah according to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. This opinion is not the muftabihi. We don't give fatwa on this. And according to the Sahibain, ila salatul asr min akhir ayyam al-tashriq, it lasts till the 13th, the asr of the 13th of Zulhijjah. And that's the fatwa. And on this opinion, the fatwa is given. So it starts from Fajr of the 9th and ends at the asr of the 13th. Right? And what is that? It's that after every farz prayer, no sunnah prayer, no nafil prayer, not even wajib prayers, just farz prayers, a person must say once, for men out loud, for women, enough that they can hear themselves. They must say the takbirat tashriq, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Wallahu Akbar, Walillahi alhamd. Once. You can choose to say more than once, it's okay. And each person is responsible themselves. So for example, if you're praying in congregation, the imam forgets, you should start. Don't wait for him to start the takbir. Start on your own. And usually this happens a lot because it's not happening all year round. So usually imam would forget. But a lot of people, they just start, and that's what you're supposed to do. Start on your own. This is not an congregational ibadah. It's for every single person to do separately. And with that, we come